If you've played College Football 26 Dynasty, you've probably heard the rumor that you can actually predict how good a player is going to be by their playing time grade. But is it actually true? I tracked 110 players for this video, and by the end of this, not only will you see that this is true, but I think we could do even more. But for starters, yes, what I saw was that when I looked at the playing time grade of the players in this sample, the better the grade was, the higher their starting overall was as a true freshman. Now, we had to be very selective with how we did this because the playing time grade is also influenced by how many people of the same position you have on your recruiting board. So it's not like we can add one quarterback and then 16 different tight ends and then compare the playing time grade for the two of those. So for this, we had 110 four-star wide receivers, and we were only looking when we had 35 out of 35 wide receivers on the board at the University of Tennessee. We were able to replicate this with 5 stars as well, but similar to past videos, it seems that 5 stars are distinctly different than 4 stars, which are different than 3 stars. Now, each point here is a different player, which is why you could see that big cluster of people with a C playing time grade and 74 overall. In fact, of the 110 players in our sample, 75 of them had that C playing time grade. That was likely due to the fact that we checked when we had 35 guys on the board, which isn't super realistic, but it does allow us to have this kind of control group and then a group of people with a lower playing time grade and a group of people with a higher grade. And if you had a C plus or better, all of a sudden you're 75 or 76 overall. If you had worse than a C, well, all of a sudden you're worse than that 74 overall where a lot of the C players were. Now, in order to extend this to the general population, we have to be confident about 2 things. Is this true for other positions beyond wide receiver? And is this true for other levels of recruits beyond just 4 stars? I am very confident that this relationship will exist with 3 stars and 5 stars. If you want to know more on why I care more about star ratings than national rank, I'll link that video. But I'm also pretty confident that this would apply to other positions beyond wide receiver. And the main thought process is, why not? For almost every single experiment on this channel, when we have 2 different ideas of what EA might be doing, they are almost always doing the simpler version. So one of 2 things is true. This relationship exists for wide receivers and then does not exist for any other position because they're doing some complicated thing that we don't understand, or this is exactly how it's going to work for all positions. For now, I gotta assume the latter. Okay, so we can clearly see that if you have a higher playing time grade than people at your position and star level, then you will be a higher overall. But what if we can do more than that? Because sure, a 1 or 2 overall boost for a wide receiver is cool as a true freshman, but what about their actual scouting? Some people have said in the comments of our videos in the past that people will use this instead of scouting a player, and if they have a really good playing time grade, they're a lot more likely to be a gem, and vice versa for being a bust. Well, if you look at whether or not these players were busts, we are almost to the point of statistically significant confidence. Now, obviously it's hard because so many of these guys were a C playing time grade, and also being a bust in general is pretty rare. I mean, only 10% of our 110 players were busts, but none of the 23 players that had a B- playing time grade or better were busts. Granted, none of the 8 guys with a D+ in playing time grades were busts, which is why we have this kind of bar that follows along the actual line. That bar is our confidence interval, which means that the true percentage of 4-star players with that D playing time grade in this sample might be as high as 50%. It might be as low as all the way over there to the right. That's why we can see in the top right that we have a 12% chance of finding results this extreme or more extreme just due to random chance. Normally, you want that number to be less than 5%, sometimes less than 10%. So we're close to being confident in our sentence of the worse your playing time grade is, the more likely you are to be a bust. But given the sample size, I'm not too sure about it. I am much more confident with gems though. And this is what is so interesting. Of the 110 players, about 16% were gems. But this time it's very clear that if you have a better playing time grade, you are also much more likely to be a gem. Again, there's only 6 guys that had this really weird A+ playing time grade, but half of them were gems. That's why even with only 6 6 samples, we are pretty confident that the true rate is between 25 and 75%, which seems to be a heck of a lot higher than the people with a C playing time grade. So how can you apply all of this to your own dynasty? Well, for starters, don't take any of this as a hard and fast rule, because it's important to remember that this is just for 4-star wide receivers. In fact, I was going to include 3 stars in this, but what I found out was when you add 35 3-star receivers to the board at the University of Tennessee, every single one of them has a playing time grade of D, which means if you try to take this chart and apply it to 3 stars, you're going to be really off. So rather than just taking this as a hard and fast rule, the way that you can actually apply this is to take 2 players that are the same position and the same star status and see if they have meaningfully different playing time grades. If you're trying to add one more receiver to the board and you don't have the hours to scout both of them, you can just look at their playing time grades when they're both on your board and just take whichever one's higher. It gets a lot more tricky if you're comparing across positions or across stars, because if you have 35 wide receivers on your board like I did compared to having no quarterbacks, maybe that playing time grade for the quarterback naturally is going to be higher. So you shouldn't just assume, oh, this quarterback has an A- playing time grade, this wide receiver, which is one of 26, has a C- playing time grade, all of a sudden the quarterback's better. That is where I want to call out the limitations early right now and say, don't do that. But I think this is great for late in the recruiting process when you have to decide between this corner or that corner and which cornerback you want to go after. Or even at the start, if you have 2 4-star players, neither of them have offers, they're both running backs, I think I know which one I want to go for now. And that's whichever one has a higher playing time grade. Huge shout out to everybody in the comment section that has been talking about this for months now, and all the people that have been talking about it online. It's been really cool to show with real numbers, something that a lot of people had a feeling about, but we could never really prove. Now we can. If you enjoyed this video and haven't yet subscribed, I would sincerely appreciate it if you did. But either way, I appreciate your time. Hopefully this was helpful. I'll see you next time. Peace out.